So thank you very much for your time, and we wanted to ask a few questions about that famous 1977 Varnasrama conversation you had with Srila Prabhupada, and incidentally it was also in Mayapur. And I know you're working now on your book, and probably that will be included in that.
It will, but that will come up in the last volume. Right now I've got 5 out of 7.
Okay.
So yeah, one more volume and then that conversation will come in at the end.
Yeah. So yeah, hopefully you have quite a clear memory of that. Of course, it was recorded also.
Okay.
And it's very interesting conversation because apparently Srila Prabhupada kind of shifted his tactics
Yes.
from, like making ISKCON devotees into Vaishnavas only, and then he started talking about introducing Varnasrama within ISKCON. But then later in conversation he started talking about the whole society. And of course the first thing, because you know what was happening before and what was happening after, we only see that little picture, but you see the big, you can help us to connect the dots and explain what was happening before, what led Prabhupada to that conversation, and was there any follow-up after that conversation as well?
All right, that's a pretty wide-ranging question. What do you want me to start on first?
Well, maybe prehistory and follow-up, because we wanted to understand it within the context of the circumstances of in which Srila Prabhupada spoke about it, because there must be good reasons why he kind of shifted in his thinking.
Yeah, it's a tough question. Trying to understand the mind of a pure devotee. I know when I first joined ISKCON in 1972, I read an article by Karanda, who was the big shot in ISKCON at that time, and it was on the topic of it wasn't really on the topic of, but it came up in the conversation. It was printed in BTG that we're not trying to initiate a complete Varnashram system, but at least we should have a set of brahmanas. We should train some people up in the Brahminical qualities, and if we can do that, that will be sufficient. That was a kind of like a mood at that time. I don't know whether in America or anything it was, but it wasn't considered very important at that time to have a Varnashram system, or if I remember rightly, Karanda said that would be a rather fanatical attempt, to change their entire world's, operations. But within a couple of years, I think in 74,
began
the little, after the meetings were over, there was a little pamphlet that was printed up with Prabhupada speaking very strongly about now we have to introduce Varnashram, and therefore you'll see like there was a number of farming communities set up within 2 or 3 years, because Prabhupada gave it that impetus, living on the farms. After that, in 1977, then there was this thing about Prabhupada said he'd only done 50% of his work, and Varnashram was still to be done.
Was that before or after the conversation?
That was I think we'd have to check that, but
must have been good. From my recollection, that was in Vrindavan.
yeah, well, I wasn't in India at that time. What we got was like a pamphlet was sent out that Prabhupada wants Varnashram to be implemented now, and because of that, there were a number of farming communities. Where we bought land in Australia, but and did that in other places as well. So by 1977, then there's this comment that Prabhupada had said that he'd only done 50% of his work. You probably find that conversation, I think it was about October the 9th, 1977. And he seemed to be pushing in that direction, but rather more strongly. On December the 1st of 76, we had gone down to, we were in Vrindavan, then we left there, we went to Delhi for a couple of days, and then Prabhupada flew down to Hyderabad, and there was this 560 acres of land that the Bedruka family had apparently given. What we did was we set up a joint trust with the, in the trustees there should always be one ISKCON devotee more than the other people that were on it, the Bedrukas. And so when we left Vrindavan to go down to Hyderabad, just as Prabhupada was getting into the car to go to Delhi and then down south, he made this comment that now we're going to start a new phase in this movement. And that was all he said. So Jagadish was the secretary at that time. He asked Srila Prabhupada, what is that? And Prabhupada said, Varnasrama Dham. So he was looking to start practically something with this land in Hyderabad. And then, of course, when the following month when he came here to Mayapur, then he elaborated on that a little bit more with the conversation. I forget what kind of brought it up, but it began with a discussion. I think it began with one or two people there, Tamal, myself, and then other people started coming to Vikram Maharaj, one or two others, and we had like a fairly lengthy conversation. And you see the back and forth there, that we were actually saying, but didn't you already say before that Varnasrama was not important? And Prabhupada said no. He said it must be done. We said, well, if we're going to be Vaishnavas, then that's beyond the Varnashram system.
Yeah.
And Prabhupada's reply, of course, was that we're not even chanting 16 rounds, a lot of his disciples. So obviously you can go through the whole conversation, but there was a strong push. So that was in February.
The people recorded in that conversation were Satsvarup Maharaj, Bhavananda, yourself, and Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah, Trivikram Maharaj was there as well.
Okay, but he didn't speak.
Through.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was a little group. It's just like it was an impromptu thing. It wasn't a scheduled meeting.
Mm-hmm.
But Prabhupada started talking about it quite strongly. And he defeated some of the arguments that we were giving, but that we were repeating things that we'd heard over the years from Prabhupada himself. So it was kind of like a dynamic process. And by 77, obviously Prabhupada could, he was completely physically, finished practically. But he made it very, very clear he wanted this to be begun in ISKCON as soon as possible. So I won't go over all the individual points, but that was the mood of it. Is that many of our devotees are not practicing even up to Brahminical standards, so we need the Varnashram system, not necessarily just for us. He wanted us to set it up, some kind of system which outsiders, non-devotees could recognize this as an alternative social system. So he kept pushing along that line all through 1977 as well. When we took Prabhupada back to Vrindavan in October, again, he pushed that Varnasrama is very important and should be inaugurated as soon as we can do it.
Mm.
It's always been, I think, a mystery how it will be done. But I've personally always linked it up with this other attempt of Prabhupada's to create self-sufficient communities. They go together, Varnasrama, self-sufficiency. In '76, Prabhupada met with a government minister in Australia, and it was just a quick mention, but I think he asked, the minister came up with some question about how would, we remold society or improve society. And Prabhupada said that the first thing is economy, which sounded a little odd at the time, at least to me, because we've always preached that we're not just about the economy. Material life means getting money, getting an economy, and everything's based on that. But Prabhupada said that you start getting a good economy, and then the other things develop around that. So economic development for spiritual purposes, obviously that's Varnasrama down. Anyway, these are just little bits and pieces. I mean, there are other things that Prabhupada said where Varnasrama was not so important. The main thing, of course, is chanting and doing the basic practices. But if you want to actually change, the way society works, which we would have to do if you want to get Varnasrama in there, that's not going to happen overnight. You've got industrialization started appearing probably about 250 years ago, and it's gradually overtaken the whole world. Previously, everything was an agrarian economy and lifestyle, so that's self-sufficiency. But Prabhupada, while saying that we need to do this, he didn't push it, that you have to do this. Wherever it's like wherever you have the resources, where you have manpower, then you can start something like this and show an ideal for the rest of the world. We have not done that. I mean, the whole industrial complex has basically wiped out all the smaller individual efforts for self-sufficiency. I think in the West, in some countries, it's banned. One example would be like in Australia. There used to be thousands of small farms on the east coast or around that area, but after the Second World War, things got industrialized even more, and the government started regulating even the production of milk. It's actually illegal to get your own milk in Australia. You can't have a cow and do it yourself. Technically, it's the government controls all of it. So, I mean, that's just one simple example, but the point is that Varnasrama, at least this is my understanding, it has to begin with, the economy. The economy of any kind of structured society is always the most important item. So you get your economic system going, which means self-sufficiency. Prabhupada gave a very simple formula one time. We were on the train from Bhubaneswar up to Calcutta, and Prabhupada told us you grow your own food, make your own cloth, make your own medicine, and what was the other? One other item which I've forgotten. Anyway, the point was that he wanted us to have these self-sufficient communities, but it's very difficult to implement it. when you're in the middle of, you know, a whole planet now which is totally industrialized and everything's involved in that complex, then how to live outside of that or show an improved way, that's very difficult to do. You know, a lot of the enthusiasm we had for farming communities has disappeared because none of us have been able to actually, you know, produce anything, you know, in any way semblance and Varnasrama. So it's kind of, we're bogged down, and I don't think that personally, I don't think that it's possible to do a full Varnashram system at this time because of the way the whole society is set up, the way the economies all work, you know, the destruction of everything that's natural to make unnatural, you know, artifacts that people worship more than they do the land. The system of Varnashram, it's a harmonious system, you know, between man and God. That's the idea of it. That when you set up a Varnashram system, you have these 4 divisions of society. The most important ones are the Kshatriyas, working with the Brahmins. Because if you don't have a government that's going to implement whatever the Brahmanas tell us is the proper way to live, yeah, then you're not going to end up with anything. So you've got to first of all figure out how to get your politicians involved. Nothing's going to, again, it's not going to develop unless the leaders of human society take it up as a, you know, proper project, if you like. So we, you know, it seems to be beyond our capabilities at the moment, and we can do a few small things, like the Hyderabad farm scheme. As soon as we arrived there, Prabhupada started taking his walks around the land, and he explained his Varnashram, you know, formula, which was to first of all go out to the local villages, invite them to come every evening for kirtan on our land, give them some nice prasadam, and then go home. Gradually, as they get purified from taking prasadam and mixing with the devotees, doing a little chanting, then they may become interested in becoming devotees themselves, taking it up. So when they get to that point, then Prabhupada said they can be given like 1 acre or 2 acres of land to live on. They're already farming, so you just allocate the land and supervise them. But the main thing is that you have like these like little groups of housing, maybe 10 or 12, and in that group they have 1 small temple, and they can have any deity of Vishnu that, you know, they're particularly attached to, because in the south, of course, there's Balaji, and so that was Prabhupada's idea, was, you know, very simple, not complex, just bring them up to the level where they can practice as devotees in a simple way. When they want to get further association, give them some land and implement this, you know, grow your own food, make your own cloth, make your own medicine, etc. So that was it. And unfortunately, you know, the arrangement that Prabhupada made there, it was basically collapsed within 2 months because the leaders couldn't get along with each other. Hence due to Tejas and Mahamsa. None of them wanted to work with each other, and Prabhupada ordered them to do it. But within 2 months, everything had stopped. So it's a very difficult task. And you know, you've got a natural system. What the kind of community that we're living in nowadays, modern society, it's completely, totally the opposite. You know, it destroys the environment. There's no connection between man and God. You know, in a regular Vaishnava society, or, you know, Varnashram society, the main thing is that you recognize, that you do your yajnas to please the Lord. In response, He provides rain. That rain nurtures the land. You grow your crops on the land, and after you've harvested them, then everything put back to seed. It goes through the whole cycle all over again. So there's a natural cycle that human beings connect with God through the performance of yajna. Once they've got that going, they get their economy, so that they can grow the food and clothing, etc. And it goes in cycles: summer, winter, or, autumn. So human beings are part of that natural cycle. And as long as you stick with the natural cycle, Krishna provides the rain. And from that rain, then you grow your crops. You can utilize the land. You can get all the other things that you need. And then it goes into winter. Whatever processes that you have there, they are nurtured in the land. And then in the spring, you produce all your crops, grains, vegetables, flowers, whatever is needed. Then you move out. It's a cycle, and it's one that constantly refreshes itself. You keep doing the same natural development of your economy by bartering foodstuffs, etc. So it self-perpetuates. But what we've got nowadays is a human society that's destroying everything rather than living in harmony with it. So the first business is to harmonize human activity into that cycle that's naturally provided by the Varnasrama system.
I'm going to Puri, and I've got to get myself a little bit together. Thank you very much. I wish I had more time, but I'm going to Puri for the retreat.
Oh yeah.
And I still have time for things.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we should.
I'll listen to it. Thank you.
So, we've got to, I think that if you want to make these farms successful, or anything successful, first thing is economy. If you don't have a proper economy, then you're not going to be successful anywhere. So that natural cycle, you go through different stages of planting, growing, harvesting, put everything into let's say it's the human interaction with nature. That's the important thing. You're not interacting with nature by industrialization. You're challenging nature. You're trying to take what's naturally there and has been there for thousands of years and turn it into something, for sense gratification, and that's the goal in life. So they go through, all these different industrial processes. They destroy the land which is meant to nurture them, and your whole society falls apart, basically. So as far as Varnasrama in ISKCON is concerned, we can do a little something. We've got the theory. We need the practice. I haven't been to the farm in Hungary, so I can't really say much about that, but it seems that they've got near to at least one ideal, which is growing your own food. I was told by one of the managers there that about 80% of what they need in terms of food stuff is right there growing on our land. We haven't got to the point where, we're building our own houses from the earth that we're looking after. It's like a hybrid. in some respects. Some of it's there, some of it's not. How we'll get to a point where we're completely self-sufficient is a doubt. I think Prabhupada, he knew what he was talking about, obviously, and he wanted us to do it, but he ran out of time himself. And therefore he made this comment that we've only done 50% of what he wanted to do. So the rest of it, that includes introducing Varnasrama. It's just very difficult, because everything is interdependent. So gradually, the industrial mechanistic society is taken over philosophically, and because it's been taken over philosophically, then gradually that's afforded human beings the kind of license, a free license, to do whatever they like with the earth, without any understanding of perpetuating, your livelihood. I mean, basically, Varnasrama is just meant to link man with God. It's a way of, taking what God provides. You become dependent on that. And if you do the jagya, that dependence, is, it's, what to say, that's what we don't have dependence on nature in modern life. We're depending on our own ingenuity, so to speak. We depend on, pulling stuff up which is not part of the, self-sufficient cycle, like oil, sucking up all the oil more and more and more, and using that in various ways. Like this thing about plastic, which is going on now. Plastic is a product, an unnatural product, taken from certain products which come out from the earth, the oil. But it doesn't benefit human society at all. We're challenging nature. Nature is a representation of Krishna through his energies in the material world. So we're challenging nature rather than living in harmony with it. And that's the biggest problem, because we don't actually have the capability of, running human society in the present industrial mechanistic, setup. I personally, I kind of gave up the idea of seeing self-sufficiency in our lifetimes. I'm a skeptic about it. I'm not skeptical about what Prabhupada said about it, but I'm skeptical about how we can actually do it and implement it. It's very, very difficult. People are, they're like, there's kids in big cities that have never seen a cow. They think milk is a substance which you get from the shop, and that's it. They've never even seen a cow. What to speak about anything else? So we're living in an unnatural state, and the idea of self-sufficiency is to get back, self-sufficiency and Varnasrama is to get back in harmony between man and God, and the whole requirement that Krishna's provided, that nourishes everything. You have the cows and bulls. They're used for producing, for ploughing and seeding, and then producing food. When you bring in a tractor, there's so many undesirable things that go along with that. If you have just cows, there was actually a survey that was done in Indonesia 20, 30 years ago. I used to go and preach there, and the government did a kind of analysis of the food supply and everything, and they had two alternatives. One was to go through the traditional system of they plough with the cows actually there. But anyway, so there's bulls, but they're ploughing, yeah. And once they're a set area, maybe it takes 10 or 12 farmers, their energy and everything to grow crops and to harvest from there. So the other alternative would be to bring in the tractors. If you bring in a tractor, then only one man is needed to do the same area of land and production. And that puts all the other people out of work. Yeah. So the government, they looked at it, tractors, they break down every 4 or 5 years, you have to replace them, costs a lot of money. When they're going, they cause so much pollution, both noise, oil, smoke, whatever. The land has to be what they call they have to put like artificial fertilizers, chemicals.
Retreated.
Huh?
Retreated.
Yeah,
Rejuvenated, something like that.
Well, in order to keep the land, from becoming barren, then, they put all kinds of chemicals in, so it kills off all the weeds, kills off all the, insects and whatever. And the end result is it's a disaster. But if you, the study that I read, their point was that if you just keep on going with the cows, then you can employ so many people to do that for harvesting and growing food and what have you. And nature itself replenishes itself when you're ploughing. The urine and stool from the cow goes in as fertilizer, so it just naturally self-perpetuates. You go through one cycle every year and then, begin again, spring, summer, autumn, and then winter. So their conclusion was that we don't want to introduce tractors because in so many different ways they destroy the environment, they put people out of work, and then the end result is that in the West at least, the big agricultural combines, they've come in and gradually bought up all the land from the small landholders. And then, they use their industrial ingenuity to somehow squeeze every last drop out of the seeds, out of the animals, and it's just, the whole thing is completely artificial. People are being taught to depend on machinery and chemicals rather than to depend on God. So the main part of Varnasrama is to learn that dependency, or to recognize your dependency on the land, and through Jagya you communicate between the demigods and ultimately Krishna himself. You come in, you bring human society into a harmonious relationship with the higher powers, God and his representatives. And in that way, the supply is guaranteed. But if you don't do that, gradually it dries up. That was one of Prabhupada's main points when we did several pandals here in India. We did one down in Hyderabad again. And they had had like a completely dry, barren spell for quite a while, 1 or 2 years or whatever. But they weren't getting any rainfall. When we did our pandal, it started pouring with rain through the whole duration of the pandal. And Prabhupada told the people, he says, this is how it should be naturally. Because we're doing this Hare Krishna. That's the Jagya. And as a result of that, Krishna's supplying the rainfall that you need, which will bring about the grains and other foodstuffs you can harvest and live nicely. So it's a question of figuring out how to harmonize human beings with nature. Yeah. And as a result of that, getting all the needs of human society very easily. Yeah, with just vegetables, milk, fruit, what have you. So we have to learn how to live in harmony with material nature. Yeah, you can practice yajna, and that yajna pleases the demigods. They supply the rain, and that brings about the growth of vegetables and what have you. So it's a simple system, but we're kind of stuck now in this, artificial way of life, artificial, understanding about what we are as human beings. They don't have any idea. So we're just burning up all the resources from the land and using it for artificial purposes. We don't, we're told everything can be just bought from the store now. Yeah. And you've got a few big companies that, practically speaking, they're so powerful they can manipulate whole governments, and keep their industrial complex running. And it's starting to show now. You've got all these weird things going on, like the plastic. There's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, there's some area that's like 5 or 10 square miles. It's just like a floating raft of plastic bottles, and nobody knows what to do with it. So that's all coming about because people don't understand who they are, what the utility of human life is, how to utilize it properly, how to maintain it. They have no idea. So we, rather than harmonizing with nature, we're challenging nature. We're trying to subdue nature to our will, and it's not going to work. It's that's how things have been going for a couple of 100 years. So even if we figure out how to make like a local economy, Varnasrama system, self-sufficient farms, etc. Even if we succeed in doing that, it's not. It can't last the way that it's going on. Human society is meant, particularly, to get us to the platform of understanding we're not this body. We're spirit souls. We are part and parcel of the superior soul, and he provides human society with whatever we need, not necessarily what we want, but what we need in order to live, a kind of natural life. So I don't know whether this is making any sense or not.
Yeah.
It's a difficult topic. I've always found it to be a difficult topic.
I know.
Yeah, it's hard to.
It is.
It's very difficult to introduce it, to live by it, because we're so dependent on all these artificial structures that we've made.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the interesting thing I found in that particular conversation that Prabhupada never even mentioned any farming communities or self-sufficiency as such, and I think you kind of in that conversation indicated to that, and he said something to the effect that it's not only that, but the whole society, Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, and what you said earlier was also very interesting, that Kshatriyas are the main part in Varnasrama because obviously Bhagavad Gita was spoken to a Kshatriya, and the entire Bhagavatam is just one example after another, Kshatriyas, and Kshatriyas, so obviously they are the pivot around which...
Somewhere in the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada actually says this.
Yeah.
That the Kshatriyas are the most important sector of society because they're charged with organization.
Yes.
And if you don't have organization, you can't do anything.
Yeah, and Varnasrama means organization. So
Yeah. And the concept of Raja Rishi, he's a Raja, he's a king, but he's a Rishi also. So there's a combination there, you know, that as a leader you're marshalling the provisions that material nature is supplying, you know, through this cycle, you know, natural cycle of doing the yajna, and then, you know, as a result of that, getting the rainfall, and as a result of that, you get the food, and you use the cows, you know, or bulls, for keeping that cycle of, you know, food growing and what have you. You're depending on the cows and bulls and on nature. Modern society wants to be independent. They don't want to recognize the natural dependency that we have, that God supplied through material nature. They want to somehow or another, you know, become the controllers. So that, you know, that's really the main problem. We have to learn how to become dependent on nature, you know, both the material and spiritual. But we're not doing that. We're doing exactly the opposite. We're challenging nature, trying to change nature, and the results are disaster.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the biggest problem now. Environmental crisis.
Yes. But the problem with the modern ecological movement is that they're also trying to, their thought is how to manage the exploitation. They don't want to just, I mean, as we're trying to exploit the earth for whatever we can get out of it. So the eco warriors, as they're referred to sometimes, they want to change that. But they don't want to come to a point of recognizing their complete dependency on nature and God. They want to try to manage it, you know, they want to remain as controllers of material nature, or they're trying to be controllers of material nature. But their aim in natural living is just to try to kind of streamline or improve the efficiency of exploitation. They're not trying to become dependent on material nature. That's the problem. So the ecological, you know, concerns that they have now, unless they actually put God in the center of it, it's not going to work. It's just going to go on, you know, instead of on a gigantic scale, they want to make it, you know, on small scale stuff, but it's still the same mentality.
Yeah.
They want to exploit everything, and Varnasrama system is exactly the opposite. We want to become dependent on it, you know, Krishna and material nature.
Yeah. I think this is one of the reasons why Avatar movie became so popular, because it shows completely different scenario.
Yes.
It's very deep actually, it's very interesting. And it's been the most popular movie of all times historically. You have any questions? Yeah.
I have one question about Prabhupada's preaching to the government. How often it was?
Not very, at least when I was with him. Prabhupada tried to kind of communicate and link up with, you know, the modern political leaders, trying to get them interested, but, you know, they're too far gone. And there was he had written to Bhagavan one time in 75 or 76 that he was prepared to come down to Italy if he could get a meeting with the Pope. And then after some time, I think the devotees told him that it was too difficult to get any kind of a lengthy meeting with the Pope. And Prabhupada then said, well, it's not necessary anyway. We can, we're going on without those kinds of people because they don't understand, how to manage human society anyway. But, if he could get a chance to meet with a leader, he met this state member of parliament in Victoria, Melbourne, in '76. But whenever he met with people like that, they're so fixed in their own understanding and their own economic development and all that stuff that they actually couldn't understand what Prabhupada was really talking about. And Prabhupada kind of basically gave up, trying to communicate with them. If people came or were brought by the devotees, he'd certainly have long discussions, and he wouldn't compromise anything. He'd give the straight philosophy, but he had little confidence that any of them could actually do anything. He realized that that they just don't have the capacity to understand how material nature works, and what to speak about reorganization through Varnasrama. So if Prabhupada was an opportunist, if somebody came, he immediately deal with that. But if they didn't come, he wasn't dependent on them anyway. So what to speak about the Pope and personalities like that. But in Hyderabad, Prabhupada went down there to open the temple. That was in August, Janmashtami of '76. So there was one man there, he was in the Minister of Endowments, which basically means that the government had taken over all the temples in Andhra Pradesh. They just kind of basically took them over. Whilst Prabhupada was there, this fellow Minister of Endowments, I just forget his name now. Anyway, he was very interested to get Prabhupada's thoughts about what the government should do with the money that was being given to Tirupati Balaji. The real reason why the government took over all the temples in the state of Andhra Pradesh was so that they could get to the cash that was being donated like crores every year to Balaji. So this man, Sagi Surya Narayan, I think his name was, he was a nice guy, he was the Minister of Endowments. He came to Prabhupada that we've got all this money now coming from Tirupati, what should we do with it? And they had ideas about, feeding and clothing and stuff like that. But the real thing that they were using it for was pushing the development of, machinery. Anyway, Prabhupada met with this man several times, and the guy actually set up a meeting between Prabhupada, at his own house, between Prabhupada and I think 7 cabinet ministers, like the big shots. They all came there, and Prabhupada preached to them, and mainly he preached about Varnasrama, Kshatriyas. He told these people, you're the leaders of society, you are like the Kshatriyas, and you should be working for the benefit and welfare of the people, and it's your duty to make sure that the proper process, religious process, was in place. And then you get this money from Balaji, you use that for prasadam distribution, use that for educating people in their varnas. So I think it was like 30 or 40 minutes talk.
Was that recorded?
Yeah. They all liked it, but of course they never did anything about it. But that was Prabhupada's idea, that if he could get some leaders of society, then you can have, reorganization or proper organization. But if people are not getting the, basic needs of life, then you won't be able to, govern properly.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was an instance. So like 7 cabinet ministers came. So there's some piety there in India at least. But they don't have any direction. They don't know how to implement things. They don't understand how to communicate with the Supreme, through this natural system of Varnasrama. That's what it's there for.
Mm.
It serves a dual nature. You worship Krishna. He gives you what you need to live, and in living, you develop your Krishna consciousness so you can go back to Krishna.
Mm-hmm.
So like a cycle, and it's always going on. But they don't understand. First of all, they don't accept that there's, that God is a person.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the biggest problems. They're all, Mayavadis, atheists. So whatever they try to do it's sure to fail. But if you get pious people in government and they start working according to the Varnashram system, then all your supplies, all your wants and needs come automatically. But the people don't want to do that nowadays. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
They don't believe that there is a supreme personality.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they say that they're religious, they're Mayavadis. Practically all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Vrindavan one time. This was a few years ago at Kartik, and so many people coming in. Temples, it's like the temple's packed every day, every night. So I was kind of watching and wondering, I see these people coming up and before the deities praying, and they give some flowers or something. So I was wondering, what are these people actually praying for? So I saw one guy, so I thought I'll follow him and see what he does. So he went to each altar. He had these big garlands that he bought outside the gate, and they put the garlands on the deity. Then he goes to the next one, Krishna, Gaunitali, Krishna Balaram, then Radhisham, did the same thing, and he's praying. And so when he came out, I went over to him and introduced myself, and we got talking a little bit. So I told him, I said, I see that, you're praying there very nicely in front of the deities. So if you don't mind telling me what, I'm just wondering what you're praying for. And then he said, well, we're all one, and we're all, so it's all Mayavad. He was praying to the deities that one day he'll become the deity. Right? That's Mayavad.
Wow.
That's the way they are. So when you see all this piety, but what they're actually thinking, anybody, no one can tell, but that's the problem. Even, you get tens of thousands of people or millions of people like Kumbh Mela or whatever, but nobody's actually teaching them what the real nature is, what man's involvement with nature should be. Yeah. So that's what Prabhupada wanted us to do. So Varnashram is not like a fixed set of rules and regulations. There is a broad picture of that. But there's lots of interactions, natural interactions that go within that Varnashram society. Mm-hmm. So you improve your realization of your dependence on the Supreme Lord. So that has to be taught. Prabhupada said that ISKCON is not a religious group. Mm. It's for education. It's an educational institution, and this is the education.